There are a few more concepts around storage technologies that you need to understand before we get into cloud computing. So there are three key types of storage system that I need you to understand. So the first one is what we call a block-based storage system. Now this is what we were talking about in the last lesson. So this is hard disk drives or solid state drives. And these are known as block-based storage systems. And what that means is your operating system, so Windows or Linux, actually sees a hard disk drive. So it sees a drive on which you can create a volume, and then you can partition that volume. So for example, here we have a 1000 gigabytes volume, and we could then partition that. So we could say, I want to create a C drive with 800 gigabytes and a D drive with 200 gigabytes, for example. So remember that with a block-based storage system, your computer will see a drive. You can then create volumes and partitions, and you can choose the type of file system you use. So for example, with Windows, you can choose FAT32 or NTFS, and that's the type of file system that's being used. And you can then install an operating system on a block-based storage system. The next one we have is called network attached storage. So with network attached storage, you're actually connecting using a network interface card. You're going over a network, and then you're accessing a network attached storage server. So the storage server is just another compute device that has a lot of disks in it, and it's already created a file system. So it's formatted its partitions and it's created a file system, and it will then share that file system over a network. And what that means is here you can actually map a drive to that network location. So your computer does not see it like with a block-based storage system as a drive that's local. You can't create a partition or format the partition. It's already done for you here. So all you do is connect to that network location. If you're working in a company, you've probably got some mapped network drives to certain drive letters on your computer. So C and D are often the local hard drives, and then you might have network attached drives, and that could be a corporate shared directory, for example. So remember that the operating system sees a file system that is mapped to a local drive letter. So that's a file-based storage system. Now, the last type of storage system I want you to understand is the object storage system. So with an object-based storage system, what happens is a user might upload an object using a web browser. So rather than using, for instance, a file management system like Windows Explorer, they're using a web browser and uploading an object to a container on the internet somewhere. Now, this is using the HTTP protocol. So remember, your web browser will use HTTP protocol, so that's the language it's using. And it uses something called a REST API, and I'll explain that to you in more detail later in the section. But just to give you a bit of an understanding now, when you connect to a website, for example, let's say you connect to Amazon.com, and you need to connect to that website and pull down some images and the text and whatever the website contains. And that would be what's called a HTTP GET request. And if you then uploaded a comment or a review for an Amazon product, you would be doing a put or a post request, which means you're putting or posting some data. So with HTTP, you can do a get, put, post, a select, a delete, and there's more of these. They're known as methods or verbs. So in this example, the user actually did a HTTP put to put an object in a bucket. The user could then put more objects in a bucket. You can put many, many objects in a bucket. It's extremely scalable. Or they could use a get request to pull an object down again. So objects can be files, videos, images, pretty much anything that any kind of file type that you may want to upload. And an important point to understand is there's no hierarchy of objects in a container. So with a file system like your shared corporate directory, you might have a directory there called sales, and inside sales you might have a folder called January and February and March and so on. And then within those you might have your documents. Now that's a hierarchy, but you don't have a hierarchy in an object-based storage system. Every file is at the same level. So just to understand the key differences between these three, your block-based storage system is basically a disk that's attached to a computer, and it can actually sometimes be connected over a network, but the computer will still see it as a disk, so something you can create volumes on. And the operating system is able to read and write data at the block level. The operating system sees the volumes and can then partition and format those volumes. Then, with the file-based storage system, the file system is mounted to the operating system using a network share. In this example, on Windows, it's connected to the Z drive. If you're using Linux, then you use what's called a mount point instead. With a file-based storage system, it's often shared by many users. So your hard drive in your computer is generally going to be used locally by you, unless you create some kind of file share to share with other people. Whereas a file storage system like this one could be a home drive, so it could be just used for you, but often it's going to be a shared directory where multiple users in your company can access the same data. And lastly, we have the object-based storage system. These are massively scalable, and they can be extremely low cost as well, and we'll see more of that later in the course. There's no hierarchy of objects in an object-based storage system. And remember, it uses something called a REST API, which I'll help you to understand a bit later on in this section.